Mhm.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We will begin. We have a packed agenda today. Given the news of our CEO, founder, and my friend Jill's passing last week, we would like to move forward and honor her vision with today's Lunch and Learn. Thank you all for the support over the past week. If anyone doesn't have the details for her service this week, please reach out after the webinar. Moving forward in her memory, we will get started, and I would like to introduce our first speaker, Pete Mohr, who will be speaking to us about Kolbe system. Our second speaker, Dean Benard, talking to us about managing whistleblower reports and workplace investigations. And to conclude, we have Patrick McEwin, who will be sharing with us some of the government assistance programs that are in place. So I'll pass it over to you, Pete.
Thanks so much, Maya. And Jill was always such a big supporter of the Kolbe system, and we've had the pleasure of overlaying what you're going to see here today on the H2R team as well. So many good things come when we have clarity, and I think that's the beauty of the Kolbe system. And so I'm going to roll right into the presentation here today. If we can hit the next slide, that would be great, Spencer. So Kolbe really starts off with an individual assessment. So many of you may have taken DISC or Enneagram or MBTI or a variety of the different ones out there. And we'll talk about some of the differences between them. But Kolbe is an assessment that each person would take individually. So it helps you understand your strengths, improve efficiency, develop leaders, and increase engagement. And on the team perspective, which is where it really shines, in my opinion, it's great to know about yourself and about the other individuals on the team. But when we start overlaying it, we have better communication, better decision making, all sorts of stuff that really boost performance in the organization. And then sort of the last piece that is really interesting, most of these assessments you cannot use in the hiring process, but Kolbe, you can. So really around hiring and retaining successfully, getting what I call the right seat or the right butts in the right seats, but the right people in the right role, and amplifying your culture. So next slide, if you would. So the three types of assessments essentially are the thinking ones, and many of you have taken these, you know, your IQ, your skill test, the SATs, all these different things. And then the ones we talked about earlier, the feeling side of things, or the affective, it's really about your preferences, desires, motivation, attitudes. And for most of us, we know we can't really be hiring that, even though it's kind of interesting to overlay it as the team develops. The one assessment that works in this fashion, like Kolbe, is all around the conative, and it's how you make decisions, which is why I love to use it as this first assessment as we overlay some other ones on top of it around thinking and feeling. But this doing side of things, as a business owner myself, I want to know how my team is going to make decisions, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. So next slide, please. The Kolbe A index, which is each person, and you can see this is what sort of your Kolbe score looks like with Georgia here, and it's unbiased, so the results are not biased by gender, age, or race. Kolbe's been around for 50 years. The founder of Kolbe, Kathy Kolbe, passed away about a week ago, unfortunately, and her legacy has her father was the person, and her maiden name was Wunderlich, and if you've ever taken the Wunderlich IQ test, it goes back that far. And she was always sort of upset with the idea around her father's work, and that not always is the smartest person the person that gets things done. So that's why she created the Kolbe around decision making, around positive and predictive, focusing on strengths. And as I mentioned earlier, it's valid and reliable. It's been proven over 50 years. People essentially don't change in this aspect. With all of the other ones, your life experiences, all the different things, the DISC, the Enneagram, those all change through your history, what you've seen, what you've done. Kolbe stays the same. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned off the bat, really Kolbe, the first step is to use the Kolbe A to identify on the top right there and capitalize on the power of your instinctive strengths. And then we're optimizing with teamwork. We get into aligning because we can use other assessments within the Kolbe assessment tools in order to understand, is that right person with their alignment in the right position? And then we can expand by hiring as well. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a bit of an assessment junkie myself. I love strength finders. I love Enneagram, all these different ones. But it's really great when you start overlaying. So if you already have done some of these within your organization, Kolbe is still a really great one to put in there because it gives a different lens on things. Next slide, please. So there's 4 modes of operation as you saw, and I'll pull mine up here too. It's really got to do with fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer. So if you can go to the next slide. When we look at this, it's really your mode of operation, and we'll dig into each one of these briefly so that you have a better understanding. Next slide, please. Each one of these has a continuum. So you can see, if you can see on mine, or if you saw on the earlier ones, they go from 0 to 10. Being a 0 doesn't, or being a 1 doesn't mean you're worse in that particular column. It just means that's the numbering system around it. So it's really a continuum. And as we roll to the next slide, we'll get into. So fact finder is how you organize information. So as you can imagine, some people like little bits of information. So if we're talking about information, some people just want the Coles Notes version of a book, right? Very small, very detailed, couple of bullet points. Other people want a bit more information. And then other people love their binder of everything. So understanding that whether you simplify, explain, or specify on Fact Finder, it's a really important thing. And you can imagine with some people on your team that there's some people that love just give me the bullet points, and other people want that specificity all the time. And if you're a person who loves bullet points and you're only giving bullet points to somebody who wants specificity and wants the big book, you can understand why decisions aren't being made in that team environment, because they can't make a decision until they have the information that they need. Vice versa, if you're giving somebody a whole pack load of information and they only want the bullet points, they won't even read the information. And we wonder why team decisions aren't being made and things aren't being done and people are procrastinating. That's only on the fact finder mode. With follow through is how you deal with systems. So people with a lower follow through, like me with a 3, we adapt systems. People that have a higher follow through systematize, and they're really always, they love their checklists, they love their post-it notes all over the place. They can't get through something until they finish the checklist. Where people like me, I look at a checklist and I'm like, I don't think so, I'll just do it on my own. All of those things are how we need to understand ourselves, how we need to understand our teams so that we can have better decision making. Quick start is how we deal with risk and uncertainty. And when we think of it, so many people don't want change. They're low risk takers. And I'm in the innovate section. So I have a 9 out of 10. I love change and I deal with change all the time. So if I'm working with someone who's a low in the stabilized zone of quick start, I could be scaring them up with talking about all of the different changes that I want to make and everything. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Especially if I'm a simplifier who only is giving them a little bit of information and they're a specifier who needs a lot of information. So all of these different areas, implementer is how you deal with space intangibles. And so low implementer would be somebody who envisions things, and a higher implementer would be somebody who demonstrates. They want the model, they like to construct, they work with their hands. If we thought of a doctor, for example, a general practitioner would probably be a lower implementer, and somebody who is a brain surgeon would probably have a higher implementer score. They love getting in there, doing the detailed work, that sort of thing. Everybody's different, and whoever you are, you're uniquely you. But as leaders of the organization, we need to understand that not everybody's like us, and we can't impose these kind of things onto each other. And that's where things happen. So then next slide, please. So the fact finders, by the way, I have all of these slides available. If anybody wants to reach out to me after the presentation, I'll make sure that they're included for anybody that wants them. The fact finder, I'm not going to read these, but as we rolled through the simplifier, explain, and specify, you can sort of understand the difference as you watch this slide. Next slide, please. Follow through. So adapt, we're varying the approach, creating shortcuts, on the systematized thing, we're creating the plan. How different is your team members? How different are you? I've had people do this test and they're like, finally, somebody realizes that I'm not like everybody else. Next slide, please. Quick start, that minimize risk factors. And on the high end of things with innovators, brainstorming. People that stabilize tend not to want to brainstorm. People that, like me, it's like I'm ready to brainstorm at any given time. That can create friction. Next slide, please. Implementer. These are the people that imagine solutions. And on the demonstrate side of things, the other end of the continuum, we're demonstrating, we're maximizing, we're building tangible things that last a long time. Next slide, please. So when we think about all of these areas of collaboration, it's all about reducing conflict in the team environment. So husbands and wives, partners do these things, parents and kids do these in order to better communicate, better deal with conflict, better understand each other. Next slide, please. And we can see once we start overlaying one person's Kolbe A to the next person's Kolbe A, as Georgia and Herb in this particular slide, we can see the areas of higher conflict. So Georgia is a high fact finder where Herb is a low fact finder. As he likes the bullet points, she wants the information. So these kind of things become apparent as we start working in the team environment. As we look at how people are making decisions, you is actually Georgia, because this was done for Georgia. But in Georgia's case, she starts by fact checking. You can see she's an 8 in fact finder. And then she systematizes, and then she goes and looks at possibilities, and then she looks for solutions. Herb is almost the exact opposite, with the exception of that middle part. He starts by brainstorming, which would be very hard for Georgia to start that way. It's not her natural capability. She's not going to work in that way. And then he systematizes, then he looks for strength and durability, and then he summarizes and clarifies the bottom line. So just by having these reports and laying them out really brings a lot of clarity to the team. Next slide, please. So when we overlay everybody's, you can see the graphical side of things, the arrows, how everybody's different in their inventory of strengths. And that's perfect, by the way, but everybody is different, and it's something to acknowledge. Next slide, please. Cognitive communication. Each of these areas has a different area of communication strength. Fact finders love written words, follow through. They love their charts and graphs and lists. Quick start, spoken word, implementer, props and demonstrations. So as somebody who's a high quick start with spoken word, if I'm giving that spoken word to somebody who's a high fact finder, instead of having it in a written sort of format for them, they're not going to absorb that information as well. Next slide, please. So we always have to have everything in different formats so people can learn in different ways, whether it's a manual, whether it's a video, whether it's audio, whether it's actually hands-on work. Next slide, please. So it's all about team problem solving. Next slide, please. And when we look at it, the best decisions are made when we have team energy in each of the 12 boxes. Although each person's naturally in one of each of those 4 columns, and one of the boxes in each of the 4 columns, it's best when we have energy in all 12. Next slide, please. So we start to overlay each person into those areas, and we see where there's gaps, and we see where there's too much of the same energy as well, which makes some really interesting conversation around the board table. Next slide, please. And then we work it through on the percentage basis. And this will be different for every type of business. If you are a group of bookkeepers, a group of accountants, that would be different from a group of contractors, let's say. Next slide, please. Really, it's all around looking at whether we have too much of the same energy, not enough of any given strength, and whether we have polarization so that we're not actually making good group decisions. Next slide, please. The other ones that I wanted to talk briefly about before we wrap this up, the Kolbe A is where we've talked about today. But Kolbe B is when you overlay your self-expectation of a job. So let's just say you were a bookkeeper. You would do your Kolbe A for yourself. You would do your Kolbe B for who you think you need to be as a bookkeeper, and then your boss would do a Kolbe C for who they think you need to be as a bookkeeper, and then we would triangulate all of those gaps, because as you can see, even on these columns, there's some differences here for this particular person in the position that they have. Next slide, please. It's all around understanding how they operate, your team operates. Next slide, please. And changing your habits as the leader in order to better communicate and better understand the flow of decision making. Next slide, please. It's all about fostering decision making. That's what Kolbe eventually gets to. Next slide, please. So you can connect with me here at the QR code. If anybody wants the slides, I'm happy to send you the slide deck as well. I'll make sure that Maya has a copy of them and we can get them out that way too. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Pete. I didn't see any questions come through, but if there's any questions, please send them over. Again, you can scan the QR code and get in touch with Pete directly if you want to learn more. Thank you again, Pete. We'll see you shortly. Dean, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here today, and hopefully this will be some information that you all will find helpful. One of the things that, I guess first a little background. So our organization does workplace investigations. We manage workplace conflict through mediation, investigation work, restorative work. And one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of is anonymous complaints or whistleblower complaints. In fact, we're also seeing a gap in the market around people having an ability to make anonymous whistleblower complaints. So we're actually addressing that with a new company that we're launching shortly that will provide that service, that portal. But that's a whole other story. The reason I'm talking about this today is because this is something we're seeing a lot of, and a lot more of anyway. And I think that organizations sometimes get somewhat concerned and maybe even paralyzed a little when these kinds of complaints come through. And the question is, well, how do we deal with this? You know, should we take an anonymous complaint seriously? And what sorts of things do we need to hear before we can move forward in addressing some of these things that might come forward anonymously? So if we can jump to the next slide. And one of the things that I think that's important to recognize is that there is value in receiving complaints, whether they be anonymous or not, but there's definitely value in receiving these kinds of complaints. For whatever reason, somebody's calling me even though they shouldn't be able to get through. I apologize for that. So some of the things are, it really can be a gateway to otherwise hidden information. You know, there's, you know, depending on the size of your organization, it doesn't have to be very big. There can be a lot of stuff bubbling under the surface. There can be a lot of things going on, a lot of conflict brewing. You know, even with what Pete was talking about, the different ways in which people process information. It's not always catastrophic conflict. It's just sometimes these issues that lie under the surface, and if not addressed or understood, can lead to bigger problems. So, you know, when people bring forward concerns, particularly these anonymous concerns, it's sometimes a bit of a gateway to having an opportunity to recognize what some of these hidden issues might be. Obviously, the ability for people to make an anonymous complaint can help them to deal with their concerns around fear of retaliation and reprisal. So, you know, having an ability to make an anonymous complaint is, I think, important in most organizations. And of course, from an optics perspective, it encourages sort of an organizational integrity. When an organization says, listen, we're creating an opportunity and we're going to take seriously any kind of information we receive, anonymous or otherwise, it demonstrates transparency, and it demonstrates that you're an organization that wants to deal with the issues that maybe, you don't want to have to deal with, but you know you have to deal with. And that demonstrates to everybody, whether it be customers or employees, that you're an organization with integrity. And of course, it signals to people within, you're listening, you're there. You don't, because there's a lot of people that feel unheard. There's a lot of people that feel like they can't get their story out. And so there's value in having the ability to do this. And again, anonymous reports can sometimes help us to spotlight issues early before they become a big problem. Because as investigators, I can tell you, we see everything from the very minor to the extreme. And 90% of the time, 90% of the time, the only reason it's reached the extreme is because it was never addressed when it was minor, and or it wasn't recognized or discovered. Next slide, please. So part of building a safer environment is going beyond saying we value a safe environment. It's having a strategy to foster that. So fostering a psychologically safe space, a safe culture for people to speak up and raise concerns. Again, whether anonymous or not. Training leaders to respond appropriately. I can't tell you how many times we find out that a manager or a director or even higher in the organization is well aware of a concern or a complaint or a problem, and takes no action and doesn't bring it to the attention of HR. And what ends up happening is sometimes it leads to a knock on the door from the Ministry of Labor, or a lawyer reaching out, or something like that, because people don't feel like they're being responded to or issues are being addressed. We need to promote anti-retaliation policies. So, the legislation speaks to, the reprisal piece, but we need to make sure as an organization that we're promoting that, there will be no retaliation that's tolerated related to people bringing forward concerns or participating in a process that's meant to uncover and discover what's going on. And then finally, offering multiple reporting channels. It's how does somebody report something anonymously in an organization that doesn't have a process for that to happen? So it is a value. Next slide. So whistleblower platforms, and there are some out there. There's about to be a new one out there that we're going to launch. But they are a secure, confidential way to create a two-way communication. And so the idea, most of them, however, are designed so that the person can go on to some website portal, they can make a complaint, it goes through to somebody at the organization. Oftentimes, the person making the report is responsible for determining what policy this might fall under, which to me is dangerous because that means the report might get directed to the wrong person in the organization. If there's a complaint about the CEO, it shouldn't be going to the director of HR. If there's a complaint about, somebody like the director of HR, it shouldn't go to an HR manager. It should go to the CEO. There's different people within the organization. Some organizations are big enough that they have internal counsel. Maybe you designate internal counsel as the person who receives any kind of complaint, but there has to be some sort of a process for those reports to go to the right people. When we have these secure portals, it doesn't just allow for the person to share their concern, but there can be a safe and secure way for us to communicate back with them and gather additional information. Because if you've ever been in the position where you receive complaints and reports of concerns, you'll know that many of them lack specificity, they're vague, they speak in larger terms, and that could be a real challenge trying to investigate something that's just a broad-based allegation. So, the ability to communicate with a person to get more specific information can help to lead to a more appropriate investigation, a more appropriate inquiry, and a fairer one. So being able to enable that is really important. Promoting reporting consistency and data analytics as well, because when we have these portals, then obviously we can generate reports from them and see what we're dealing with. There are statistics actually out there that say that organizations that have anonymous reporting hotlines, portals, whatever route you want to go, that for every 100 employees, an organization can generally expect to receive 1.5 complaints per year. So now it doesn't mean every one of those complaints is going to be serious or even real, but being able to have those analytics and to look at that, we have a few clients that we act as a third party for them in a very rudimentary way right now. that we have a couple that we've worked with for 3 years and we've had no complaints. And then we've had a couple we've worked with for a few years and we've had, one a year or one every other year. So it really just depends. But having that understanding of what you're dealing with within your organization and being able to create those analytics is helpful. Of course, confidence in the process for people raising concerns. And really, it's a way of leveraging technology to be sort of an ally in creating an ethical culture. And I think that's what these whistleblower platforms can really be valuable for. Next slide, please. So some of the questions about these whistleblower platforms, number one, who should get the report? How should that happen? We're advocating for the reports to come to us as a third party, that it doesn't go from the portal out to somebody at the organization, but it comes to us. We do the work of gathering additional information, and then we provide information to the organization, to the appropriate person, with not only an overview of what the issues are, but possibly some options in how to deal with it. The question really is, how should you communicate with the reporter? And you have to set up some sort of way of doing that. A telephone hotline where they can leave a message is not terribly helpful. Then how are you going to manage the report? And can you actually investigate these reports when there's no identified complainant? And the answer to that is yes, I think you can. Next slide. So what are the challenges? Can we? I said we can. How do we overcome these challenges? Let's first talk about what the challenges are. So, number one is credibility, right? In any kind of an investigation, we typically have to assess credibility. The credibility, how likely is it that the person that is sharing information with is being truthful, is sharing information that is, the truth from their perspective. We also have to look at reliability. In other words, there's a difference. Credibility and reliability are two different things, but the reliability piece is, can we rely on this information? Is it worthy? Is it information that we can truly hang our hat on? So that is very difficult to do when you have an anonymous complainant that you can't interview. So that's challenge number one. Follow-up limitations. Sometimes it is difficult to ask for clarification, even with these portals that as I say, there are some out there that exist. Oftentimes people will make a complaint and then they get a username and a password, but they have to go back in and check. And if they don't, then there's no ability to have communication. And so the lack of follow-up communication in the face of a very vague complaint could be problematic and challenging. There's also the issue of fairness. There's a risk in acting on incomplete information, right? I mean, we get, let's say somebody says, well, the director operating this particular division in the company is racist, and they don't provide any specific examples. How do we manage that? Do we just simply levy this allegation against this person and have them respond? And if we did, what would they respond to? So these are, again, things that have to be considered. And so it's all about balancing the fairness, right, with action, right? It's tricky, but it is possible. Next slide. So the first really comes down to, how are we going to, capture this information? So we have to have some kind of structured intake, right? So, structured intake forms to capture all the available information, making sure we're, asking all the right questions. This is very easy to do and is something that is, to me, has to flow from the ability for a person to make the complaint. Establishing procedures to filter out malicious or frivolous reports. We had one organization we were working with that was in the middle of a union negotiations and collective agreement negotiations, and they weren't going well. And all of a sudden, their anonymous portal received something like 75 complaints in one day about all kinds of things. And didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there was a link between this sudden massive number of reports coming through, and and so we have to have a process for filtering through these and understanding, well, what is the reality of some of these concerns. So really, we have to treat every report as a formal piece of evidence from the start, because what if somebody makes a false allegation? I mean, we do investigations sometimes where someone will make a false allegation, completely fabricate something, and the investigation ends up proving that, in fact, it was malicious. The complaint was made in bad faith. Well, there's often accountability for that when somebody does that. But if the person's anonymous, that's kind of hard to do. So, we really have to manage all of the evidence carefully and make sure that as soon as we get information, we're treating that evidence as a formal piece of information that will lead to each next decision that we make. And each piece of information informs the next decision. Next slide. So part of it is about prioritization and risk assessment, right? We always hear about risk assessment, but assessing the urgency and the potential harm of a reported issue. I mean, there can be something that, these reports don't necessarily have to be about how someone's being treated. It could be a safety issue. It could be, well, there's an ongoing practice in the factory that is going to kill somebody one day if it's not addressed, and nobody seems to care. And that, and so that obviously has a potential risk of harm. It's not the kind of thing that could be ignored, but something like that hopefully would be wouldn't be hard to make some general inquiries to try and understand what we're dealing with. So, once we go through that process of assessing that urgency, we use a triage system to categorize the complaints. Is it a safety issue, a legal issue, an ethical issue? What are we dealing with? And that to me is it's just like going to the emergency department. The person with a cough and no other symptoms is not going to receive as quick attention as the person with massive chest pain and shortness of breath. So it's all about trying to understand what we're dealing with and categorizing it and creating a triage in terms of how we'll deal with it. We consider the breadth of the impact. Are we looking at an impact with respect to a particular individual or individuals, or are we looking at something that has a systemic impact? Are we talking about an allegation of theft, internal theft or fraud, or are we looking at, unethical harassing behavior? So there's all of these things we want to take into consideration and start prioritizing each one of them and understanding what can we do. And it's all about balancing thoroughness with speed. Right. I mean, I have this phrase I use, and I certainly didn't invent it. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have heard it. But the phrase that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, and it's a very important way to think. We don't want to run off, knee-jerk reaction, start breaking down doors, so to speak. No, we need to take our time. We need to look through these things, understand them, and let the information we collect inform the next step, as I said earlier. Next slide. So a big part of this, in order to get to that place where we can start looking at how we might conduct our investigation, how we might look into these issues, is it's all going to flow from communication, right? So if we're using a secure whistleblower platform and we can have that dialogue, that's incredible. If we can go back and forth with the person, asking them questions, and they're willing to share information with us, obviously they're going to want to be careful about what they share. One of the things to remember is it isn't about figuring out who's making a complaint. I could tell you that many times when an organization gets an anonymous complaint, one of the first things I get told is, we think we know who made the complaint. And while that might be helpful from the perspective of understanding perhaps where in the organization the problem exists, it isn't about figuring out who made the complaint. It's about simply determining, because even if we do, what are we going to do? Confront the person? Say, we know you made the complaint? I mean, that's not really going to be helpful. The idea here is, we want to understand the issues and figure out, okay, this person has pointed, to some smoke. Let's see if there's fire. And let's do that by communicating and gathering some information. So, maintaining that communication, even when minimal information is provided, is still important. Sharing updates. When somebody makes a complaint, one of the first things I say to people is, if you've received a complaint through one of these portals, respond back and say, thank you very much. These kinds of reports are extremely important. We take them all very seriously. We're going to look into this further. There's words you want to avoid. You don't want to say we're going to investigate, because you don't know whether this is worthy of an investigation. And the word investigation within your policies may carry certain obligations. So you want to be careful with the language you use, but you still want to communicate with that person and assure them that you're taking it seriously and you're going to look into things, right? Reinforce the process that it's transparent and it's fair. Right. And that's going to happen just in all of the communication you do. This person that shared information, maybe they can share the names of other people. Maybe they want to be anonymous, but they might share the names of other people, or maybe they won't. But, we want to try and gather as much information as we can, and that open channel basically builds confidence, even when we don't have names. Next slide. So again, when we're investigating anonymous complaints, it's about focusing on facts, not the identities. I'm not going to lose sleep over who I think might or might not have made this anonymous complaint. The reality here is, I mean, the funny thing too is sometimes we do investigations and we know who the person is. The person has come forward and they said, but I'm not going to participate. I want to be anonymous. You can't use my name in anything. Now, depending on what they're complaining about and the issue they're raising, the organization might have an obligation to follow through with an investigation. And the courts lately have been landing on the side that people don't get to stay anonymous. So this is where whistleblower platforms are going to become more important, because the courts are already starting to make rulings in cases where they're saying, no, you must reveal the name of this person. If you know who the person is, you must reveal their name. And I understand why the courts have gone down that path, but it's just something we have to manage, right? It doesn't mean, well, if you're not prepared to participate, or if we don't know who you are, then we can't do anything. It may be, it may very significantly limit what we can do, but it isn't necessarily going to stop us from doing anything. And again, as an organization, you need to be seen to take all of these things seriously. Well, you need to take them seriously. I'm not suggesting you want to pretend, but you can only go as far as you can go, and you do what you can do, and then you file that information away, because if there was any validity to it, then more information will follow, and eventually you may end up building a library of information on something that does give you the ability to move forward. Obviously, you're going to look for any kind of corroborating evidence. If somebody says, well, there's an issue going on in such and such a place, well, maybe some informal inquiries can be made to sort of get a sense of what's going on. Maybe somebody can keep an ear open, maybe a meeting with a manager or a director to get a sense of how things are going without suggesting that there's been any kind of complaint made. Just the ability to try and gather some additional information that might corroborate or not, or might refute what this person's raising. If there are specific parties named or involved, and the issue is significant and serious enough, then interviewing related parties may help you to gather more information. Whatever you do, document it. Document your decisions, document your rationale. What you don't want is for someone to make an anonymous complaint, even if it's written on a note and slipped under your door because you don't have a portal. You don't want that to happen. And then, a month and a half later, have to explain why you don't have any documentation of any effort whatsoever taken to deal with that if, for example, you're questioned later or a more significant issue occurs. So really, even without a name, even without an identity, there is always going to be a path forward on these cases. Next slide. So again, I think it's important to look at how we can transform complaints into opportunities, right? So I like to look at complaints as really gifts of insight. These complaints are going to happen. There's going to be people who are going to raise concerns. This is an opportunity to understand more, identify potential systemic issues within the organization, or again, patterns. You may have several anonymous complaints over a few years, but you might start to eventually recognize a pattern if you're using the data from these complaints and paying attention. It's an opportunity to improve training. Maybe there isn't anything you can do, but it sort of suggests to you, oh, we seem to be getting a lot of grumblings about communication among the management team. Maybe we should put together a program on, on communications, something simple, a simple education program. It can just point you in the direction to things where you have gaps and weaknesses that you can work on. Don't think of complaints as always being a negative thing. Sure, we'd love to never have them, but let's try to use them to the extent that we can, because every complaint really is a chance to make the culture better. Next slide. So I'll stop there. I don't want to use my time. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I do appreciate your attention. And if you want to get a hold of me, my contact information is here on the screen, and I'd be happy to provide the slides and as well if anybody would like to have access to them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dean. And that was in less than 30 minutes. So amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much. On to our third and final speaker. Patrick, take it away.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I work with a group called Northbridge Consultants. We're here in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. And today I just wanted to kind of touch on the concept of government assistance associated with the fiscal trade uncertainty. We're all in the news. We all see the news going on with the tariffs and everything else going on, both to the south of us as well as globally. And I just want to kind of touch on some of the Canadian responses that exist currently, and see whether or not some of these may resonate with your particular business situations, be it HR hiring, be it how you structure your company in terms of your engineering stuff, that sort of thing. So let's go to the next slide. So again, my name Patrick McEwin. So I'm part of the North group here in the region, sort of in the context of sort of business development, and we've been a company. We've been around for about 20 years right now in the government assistance space. So we're primary goal is to identify and facilitate access to a number of the government assistance programs that exist out there, and try to help you get some working capital in order to assist in your development activities. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so just in general, we usually like to take very much kind of a holistic approach in terms of the entire workflow, I would say, in terms of how a manufacturing engineering company may do business. So there may be the activity of developing a new product. There's going to be research and development costs associated with that, and associated programs to support innovation. There may be activities when you're starting to go and you're expanding or you're pivoting and you need to buy new capital equipment. There's going to be opportunities sort of in that phase. From an HR perspective, maybe you're bringing in new equipment, or maybe you're pivoting in a different direction. You need to train your staff, upskill your staff in order to take on new responsibilities, opportunities from that perspective. Process improvement. This is just ongoing R&D activities within your companies in order to continue to be competitive in sort of the landscape that we currently find ourselves in. And again, then going into the production activity associated with that as well. And then ultimately at the very end, sort of the marketing, the exporting activity, identifying new markets, identifying new places in order to sell or distribute your product. There's opportunities from that perspective as well. So again, we try to take a holistic approach from A to B when it comes to sort of your product life cycle. Okay, next slide. So we try to identify in terms of a scope, in terms of where funding opportunities exist, sort of in these categories, so specifically business growth, innovation, workforce development, and sector-specific opportunities. So let's go next slide. So under the business growth, again, speaking to something like CanExport, I'm going to speak to these after the fact, but I just want to kind of give you just a brief kind of identification of some of the opportunities that kind of fit under each of these categories. So first, business growth. CanExport is a very popular program that comes in terms of facilitating that export efforts, in terms of potentially finding new markets. On the innovation side, if you're in the business of engineering and R&D, there's going to be the scientific research and experimental development programs, IRAPs, SIF, MyTax. MyTax works with academic partners if you're going to be pairing off with the university or other academic institution, and obviously the superclusters that exist across the country in very specific superclusters, which look for collaborative partners. On the workforce development side, this is kind of where we look for grants and wage subsidies. These are the Canada Jobs grants, student work placement programs, that sort of thing as well. Opportunities for you to kind of build out your teams. And at the very end, sector specific, things like the film and digital media tax credits, Canadian Media Fund, things like that are going to be very specific to a particular sector or field. Okay, next slide. So I'll touch on first CanExport. This is delivered by the Trade Commissioner's Office. It's helping companies break into new markets. And this was one of the announcements that came out federally in response to the tariffs, specifically the sort of renewed emphasis of companies in Canada attempting to find new places in order to export their products. So this is a relatively straightforward program in the sense that you can receive up to $50,000 of 50% of your project costs. And it's really tailored for companies in order to drive marketing initiatives, going into international markets. These are trade shows, outreaches, all that sort of stuff. It's a very popular program. It was just opened up, and I believe it ends, unfortunately, at the end of May in terms of the intake. But it's usually an April, May type activity, and there's usually quite a run in terms of people attempting to take advantage of this program. But it's a very, very popular one. Okay, next slide. There's the regional development agencies, the FedDevs Ontario, CanNor, FedNor. These are basically initiative-based innovation programs. So they're looking for companies who want to further develop and commercialize their own internal technologies. So again, in response to the uncertainty that's happening now, a lot of companies are kind of looking internally in terms of how can I maximize sort of the knowledge base that we have within our company and our product. And these are the sort of funds that help companies sort of support that. And it pays off in terms of direct labor associated with the efforts. So you would actually engage with an ITA with one of these programs, and then you can actually receive funds via labor in order to support your development activities. Okay, next slide. This one's a new one that just came out just recently in regards to the provincial government, the Ontario Together Trade Fund. And this one is focused specifically on the idea of reshoring supply chains and diversifying sales portfolios. So it comes in the form of a non-repayable grant or loan, and it could be up to 75% of a maximum of $5 million, depending upon what you're spending the money on in that particular case. But in this is again directly in response to the tariffs that are on us. If you happen to be in a circumstance where maybe you want to onshore development of a product or production and manufacturing of a product that used to be made somewhere else, or you're planning to pivot that into another location, these are the types of programs that are meant in order to do that. Again, specifically speaking to supply chain, if there's opportunities for you to collaborate with also companies within Canada in order to pair off, in order to kind of minimize the risk associated with exposure to supply chains in the United States. These are the sort of programs that exist in order to support that as well. Okay, next slide. Financial institutions. We have a number of government institutions and financial institutions that are supporting when it comes to government assistance in the context of the uncertainty that's happening in the South. Specifically, Canada's Small Business Financing Program. So this is an opportunity where the government is sharing the risk with lenders in order to get opportunities for small companies in order to obtain loans. EDC, the Export Development Canada, they've developed the Trade Impact Program and some of the elements within it, trade credit insurance. They're also very good in terms of providing access to working capital. Again, kind of coming back to that idea in terms of the loans. And also the Business Development Bank of Canada, BDC, again, working on financing activity. They actually now have some sort of a venue that actually provides advice in the context of financing, as well as some programs associated with loan deferrals. Next slide. Going into the concept of hiring and training. There's obviously, this being the summer, there's going to be the IRAP youth employment programs, student work placement programs, but more in context with, again, with the uncertainty that we're seeing. Programs like WillWorks is come out with wage subsidies for manufacturing. So these are opportunities in order to upskill some of the employees within your staff in order to then take on new skills to then subsequently be more competitive in sort of the changing landscape that currently exists in the South. Next slide. So yeah, this wraps it up. I was just going to be very, very brief. But again, you can certainly reach out to me. You have my email address and my telephone number right here, and I'd be happy to speak to anyone in terms of where they are and whether or not there's any funding opportunities in terms of programs that that may speak to your companies. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for sharing these. Again, if someone has a question, please let us know, or you can reach out to Patrick directly. There is his contact information. To conclude, I think I have one update. Next slide. Just wanted to briefly mention our H2R's Executive Networking Group event. This is our second one that we're hosting. It's coming up June 4th. It is from 4 to 6 p.m. The venue is Lala Social House. It's in Waterloo and it's in person only. So if you would like to be registered, just reach out and we'll send you a link to that. All right, I would like to thank our speakers again, Pete, Dean, Patrick, thank you so much. And we will see you next month. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.